One of the best books that I have ever read is known as The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. No, I'm not advertising it, I'm not promoting it. I'm just saying that I love that book from the time that I came into contact with it. And you can guess, for it triggering that inspiration, that emotion in me, I must have experienced some negative thinking. We're talking of negative thoughts here today. This is Now Tell Us. I'm your host, Anthony Murore. Today at Now Tell Us, we have a guest who is going to be with us and talk to us about breaking free from negative thoughts and patterns. His name is Wesley Jackson, and he's going to be here shortly. But before he comes, let me remind you to please share this with all your friends. If you have a question as we are going on, you can ask and we will answer it. If you have a comment, any comment, please don't fear. Don't think negative about it. Just put it forward, and it's going to be good to all of us. We appreciate feedback. And I won't take much more time just talking because we have much to hear from our guest today, Wesley Jackson. So, why don't you join me as we go together to meet Wesley? Here we go. Hi, Wesley.
Hello.
Yeah, good to see you.
Thank you for having me here today on Now Tell Us, Anthony.
Yes, you're welcome, and we are honored to have you here. And we'd like to know, where is it that you are at right now?
So, right now, I am actually in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, but I come from California, US.
Vietnam.
hmm
Vietnam. I used to hear of Vietnam when there was a war, and then the
hmm
movies and everything. So, what takes you there? I'm curious. What takes you there?
I've been here since the summer of 2016, actually. I came
Oh,
here with a job working for my dad originally for about 2 years. And then
mhm.
I stayed after that working for myself in digital marketing originally.
Wow, that's beautiful.
hmm
Digital marketing. That's something that is very needed in the present day world. And I believe you're having a great time here, there, and worldwide because digital marketing is you can do it from anywhere and do it
hmm
anywhere else.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know also, as you were growing up before you were in Vietnam, how it was, how life was, how as you were born and growing up, things you experienced. I'm always curious to hear good stories, and also my audience. Now
This
tell
is
us.
a it's a good story, but also not necessarily an easy one to tell every so often. So this
Mhm.
story does start from my early days, and I feel that it will resonate with many of your listeners who might also be going through a similar journey or have already gone through one as well, just like mine. So I grew up in a household where I was the oldest of three siblings, and I became an older brother at just over 1 year old. And so I learned very quickly that I had this sense of responsibility towards others, and this realization profoundly affected me and shaped my behaviors and perspectives at a very young age. And it
Mhm.
instilled in me this kind of innate instinct to protect and nurture those around me. However, life was not always easy because of this as well. My early life was marred by fear, in particular, fear of punishment, whether it was physical, mental, or emotional. My father was a tough man, and I quickly learned to navigate the unspoken rules of our household to avoid conflict. And so,
Mhm.
because of this, I found myself continually walking on eggshells, modulating my behavior, and then trying to predict and accommodate the moods of my parents. And so, I felt more often than not that I was being punished, not necessarily for what I did, but for who I was. And so the result of all of this was an intense fear of rejection and a crippling shyness that lasted well into my 20s. I'm 31 now. And so the verbal abuse, the name calling, and the body shaming that I was subject to from my father in particular, it created a deep void of self love in me and inflicted deep emotional scars as a result as well.
Well, and I can imagine that big responsibility, and many people feel the responsibility, and they fear that maybe they are not delivering. It makes it even worse when you see that from the response of the people around you, those people that you trust, those people that you feel that they are capable or they are supposed to be taking care of you, protecting you, and then you feel there is harm coming from that. That makes it even more worse. So, I- I- what thoughts were going through, and was there any time that you went to very negative thoughts that you could mention? I don't know. Maybe I don't know.
Definitely. So,
Mm,
amidst all this chaos, I first found an unlikely refuge in the form of books. As early as 4, actually, I was finding solace and an escape from my reality in the pages of books. And
mhm,
so I loved reading. I loved the knowledge and the why behind things. However, my passion for reading and my thirst for knowledge wasn't necessarily always seen as a positive trait by everyone. And so at a very young age, I was labeled as having oppositional defiance disorder, largely because I wouldn't take naps when I was younger. Instead, I wanted to read.
mhm,
And later on in my educational journey, I also, my struggle with dyscalculia, which is basically the math version of dyslexia, where like numbers are shifting positions with each other and stuff like that.
mhm,
That prevented me from joining the gifted and talented education program within California initially. And so these experiences all made me feel deficient and broken, and it only further eroded my self love. So I had, a lot of thoughts going through my head of how I'm just not good enough. I'm not capable of doing certain things. And there was a lot of negativity where I was thinking, I am not this. I am not someone who is confident. I'm not someone who raises their hand in class and answers questions, even if they know the answer. I didn't do that until very late in life. And looking back, if I could do one thing over, I would change the way I was responding to these thoughts within my own head because this was all happening inside my head. On the surface, I just looked like kind of like a robot. I didn't talk very much. I didn't express myself very much in public. But as I navigated these adversities and trials, I began to see a different perspective, and the labels, the judgments, the misunderstanding, they did not define me. They were just part of my journey, but they were not necessarily my destination. This wasn't where I was headed, and I realized that, luckily, I guess I would say somewhat earlier in my life. And I realized that my curious nature and my need to question the status quo and my struggles with learning were not signs of being deficient, but rather they were signs of a unique and what is called a twice exceptional mind. So that's someone who is gifted intellectually, but also has learning disabilities. It's a really interesting concept. So, despite being misunderstood and berated by teachers and even my own father, my resilience and my innate thirst for knowledge eventually did lead me to being admitted to the gifted and talented education program 1 year later.
mm. What could have triggered that shift from,
Mhm.
yeah, the change that you started now imagining yourself as a worthy person, someone who could live to your potential? What could have triggered? Was it a book you read? Was it a seminar you attended? Or what could have that been?
So I read a lot of books. I would not say it was any one book in particular, but it was the shift from simply consuming information and hoarding knowledge within my mind. And it
Mm-hmm.
was the shift from that, from, taking in massive amounts of input. I needed to shift from that to actually starting to output and, embody and act on the information that I was learning. I
Mm-hmm.
spent so many years just hoarding knowledge inside my own head and not actually really acting on very much of it at all, just learning it for the sake of wanting to understand it, but not necessarily do anything about it.
Hmm. I came across a term that I have not come across before, or rather, it's a two word term, and I haven't seen it before. And I was curious, what does that mean? Twice exceptional.
Hmm.
What could that be? What is that?
Yeah,
What
so you
twice
can be
exceptional?
exceptionally gifted, but also exceptionally disabled, essentially
Okay,
within the mind.
and what was it for you?
So for me, this feels so weird saying this on a podcast, but for example, in my particular case, I can have a genius level IQ, but I also have dyscalculia, so I do not do math very well at all.
Okay.
I also have got ADHD, so that's another big kind of thing that holds me back a lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And going a bit back, you talk about you being there, and I don't know, this could be another weird question, but you see how it comes. Going back, you talk about being there after your father took you to Vietnam in his business, but then you talk about your experience with him growing up, your parents in general, and the not the so good experience that you had growing up. What's the what's the condition right now? What is your father still there? Are your parents still alive?
My parents are thankfully still alive.
And
They are separated.
oh, they are separated. And how
Yes.
are they with you sharing this story? I mean, that's why I
I
said it could
think
be a
I
weird.
think they realized a long time ago that they can never tell me what to do. And that I'll do whatever I want if I feel like it's the right thing to do.
Okay, and then now they are. And what brought about you going on your own in business? If I can ask you
Hmm,
that, from
that's a
your
good
dad
question.
moving into your. Mhm.
So I definitely modeled myself after my father in that respect. He's also an entrepreneur. He started his own business when I was still a toddler. And so, but before that, he worked for McDonnell Douglas, which is now known as Boeing. And I definitely got my self starter attitude and my entrepreneurial mindset from watching him do what he did with his business. And I just thought from a very young age that it was really cool and amazing to, be your own boss, right? And determine your own schedule. Granted, the reality of that is not necessarily always, roses and rainbows, because you could a lot of the times end up working far more than your average employee ever would. But I honestly wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. I've been working largely for myself for most of my professional career, luckily.
Okay, that's beautiful. Costa says that he just read the overview and he says, "Good job with yourself." And he sees a lot of hard work on yourself. Stay well and blessed. And because we are listening and we are talking about breaking free from negative thought and thought patterns, and I am guessing you could have some few points in on list form. And the one,
Mhm.
two, three, four. Let us hear them. How do we break free from negative thought patterns?
So I share this story not to dwell on the past per se, but to highlight the importance of understanding oneself. I know
Okay.
firsthand the challenges of living with trauma, ADHD, bipolarity, complex PTSD, a whole host of mental issues, and I'm intimately familiar with the impact that these can have on our lives. However, the journey of self-understanding and embracing our unique strengths and finding ways to thrive despite our struggles can be truly transformative. And
Hmm.
with this said, I firmly believe that the way we treat each other greatly influences the world that we create. My journey with its ups and downs has inspired me to share my story and to use it to foster empathy, understanding, and hopefully ultimately change within the world and within other people who hear what I have to say. And I want people who are listening right now, in particular, to remember this: that your past does not define you.
Hmm.
You are not your struggles. With resilience, self compassion, and understanding, we can actually forge our own paths and redefine our future.
That's a very good message to everyone who's
Thank you.
listening out there. Uh, like Costas, who's giving us some feedback. Thank you, Costas, and everybody else out there who's listening. We appreciate you and the time that you take to listen. And I remind you to share this with your friends, please. And let's keep
Yeah,
thinking.
thank you, Costas.
Yes, Costas. That's good, Costas. So I discover you have a podcast. Tell us about it.
Mm. So, my podcast is known as Surviving Humanity, a self help podcast. And I started this because of my own personal story.
Hmm.
And the mission behind the podcast is to help shift others' perspectives so they overcome the obstacles in their lives.
That's good. How is it? How old is it, and how is it doing so far?
It is very new still. So, it just started at the very beginning of March. So, we are on month 4 now.
That's good. Keep going. Keep going.
Thank you.
Yes, and we wish you the greatest of great times ahead.
Thank you.
And on that note, which in your business or in your life, maybe at school, in your sports, which could have been one of that times that you felt at the top of the world?
Hmm.
Now, coming from negative thoughts and going to the top of the world.
Yep, definitely. I this is the power of positive thinking right here.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt most on top of the world when I actually had a sense of meaning and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt that the most when I was actually being a leader, and that was within my student organization, which is now known as Torero Gaming at the University of San Diego. And
Okay.
so that was a esports student organization, and for anyone who doesn't know what esports means, that means competitive video games.
Hmm. Competitive video games.
Hmm.
I'm trying to imagine that because I have some people who are interested in gaming, and I'm like, oh, where does this lead to?
Sometimes it could lead to good places.
Yes, like where? Like in the digital marketing world?
Hmm.
Maybe, yeah, if, because that's the direction that you took. Uh,
Hmm.
and the people that you told us that you experienced such a low times in your home, and there are a lot of people who are listening who've also experienced negative aspects in other neighborhoods. But starting from school, you go to school, and what you face there, you're bullied, and things are not as well as they are at home. You're not scoring well, and you're feeling low.
Hmm.
Did that happen to you also in other places? About now, or were the grades matter? Did the grades only matter to your parents, or they mattered to your teachers? Were you mocked by where you failed?
Yeah, so that's something that's really interesting because the unspoken rules that I mentioned that I learned early on in my household, one of them was that if I did well in school and just be quiet, keep my head down, get A's, sometimes B's, then I will largely skate by unnoticed, and I won't
Mm-hmm.
receive any of that negative attention from my parents. So because of that, I had quite the perfectionist streak, especially within school. So school was almost everything to me for quite a while, and if I when I started to slip, it was really crushing me for a long time. And I was slipping from, I would say, the year of early 2010 until mid 2013. And that was between high school to university. So I graduated high school in 2010. And when I entered university, I actually ended up taking a medical leave of absence for clinical depression. And so I left my university in my first semester in November, and I didn't return back until the next year. And so during that time, during that 1 year in particular, I would say that was when I was at my absolute lowest, especially because when I was at home, not really doing much, it didn't really make me feel any better about myself because my life was so defined by achievement. And
Mm-hmm.
when I wasn't working, it felt like I was useless. And I hated the feeling of that. And because of that, it was very easy for me to get manipulated into doing things for other people that I didn't necessarily want to do or weren't necessarily the best for me.
Mm. At 30, think you're quite at a very advantaged point, and you have the whole life, the whole world ahead of you. Tell us about your big dreams, if you can.
Hmm. Let's see. So, my big dream is largely tied to surviving humanity right now. My dream
Okay.
for that, my vision, let's call it, is to help foster a sense of community, connection, and support over our common struggles and help people realize that we can all overcome them, especially if we rely on each other. And we can overcome far more than we really think we can if we just reach out and ask for help.
Yes, we are better together than we are apart. So we grow together.
Hmm.
Yes, and we see that you are going to make it, especially because of the way that you are prepared and in the positioning that you are at. Uh, Coming from one country to the other, because that's another point, and experiencing different cultures, meeting different kinds of people, where there are some challenges that could have driven you to think of home and wanting to go home, or wouldn't you want to go back home because where you are living at is paradise, maybe?
There's pros and cons of living anywhere in this world. So, it's not all sunshines and rainbows, but yes, I do like it here better than where I was from. But I'll say one thing, like when I first came here, right? I tend to make mountains out of molehills within my mind. So I make things harder in my mind than they really are.
Mm-hmm.
And but I want people to realize that through my story and the fact that I was able to move across the world into a completely different culture and let's call it ecosystem, that no matter how steep the mountain, let's call it, that you see, no matter how steep it is to climb, and no matter how turbulent the waters that you may have to cross, there is a strength within each of us that is far greater than any obstacle that we ever face. The key is to just realizing that and taking that power back for ourselves. And, there is resilience in each of us that, when harnessed, can help us overcome even the most daunting of adversities.
Yeah. And in every area that you move into, and the challenges or the obstacles that you encounter, in your perspective, and you being someone who's positive thinking, and even though you create more mountains out of molehills, there are things that you see and you pick and you say, this negative thing or this challenge or this obstacle is helping me to go higher. And or you take something and create it, you turn it into a positive thought and take positive action towards it and get some good positive results. What could that have been in your life, and especially where you are right now?
Hmm. So I would say the big positive result that I started to see was when I made the shift
Hmm.
from the victim mindset to realizing that I was more of an actual survivor and a fighter. And what I thought made me weak actually was what made me strong.
Hmm.
Sorry. But in December of 2012, I mentioned how I was struggling academically up through 2013 when my grades were still slipping and I was placed on academic probation even.
Hmm.
That was a big turning point for me. It's when I finally started to understand and accept my ADHD and I actually seeked out proper help. And then within 6 weeks, my grades improved dramatically. I went from academic probation, which is nearly failing out of university, to A's and B's. And it's all because I actually acknowledged my challenge and sought out the right help. And with the message here for people is to remember that it's okay to seek help when you need it. And we often see seeking help as a sign of weakness, but it's actually a sign of strength because it requires a lot of vulnerability, especially I would say as a guy in this day and age, to admit that you need help and that that you're weak in certain areas. We're so used to putting on this illusion that nothing phases us we are not weak at all. There's no dents or chinks within our armor whatsoever. We have to be 100% on guard all the time. But I think that acknowledging that you're actually struggling doesn't make you less of a person here. It actually makes you more of a human.
That's very well said. We
Thank you.
appreciate that. Yeah, because many of us would want to ourselves to appear as that perfect person, that person who's 100% out there in the general public. We don't like to accept the fact that there are some of our areas that we lack. There are some areas that we are weak at. And it's once we admit that and we are willing to be vulnerable and seeking help that we can always improve. Because for things I don't know, there's someone out there who knows much more than I do. So if I may ask for directions or for assistance to come out of the hole that I find myself into a better place, then I can always get that assistance, that direction, that insight that is going to drive me into a better position tomorrow. So I agree. And thank you for that.
Hmm.
Costa says that if you encounter a very powerful darkness, know that somewhere there is light.
That's a
Hmm.
nice one. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Notice.
you can't have light without darkness, and vice versa.
Hmm. Yes, and it's only that time that comes that you realize I'm in a dark place, because there are people who may not realize that they are in a place where they are needing some help, and accepting that fact and accepting the help that they may get, or seeking for the help that they may get.
Yeah, definitely. And that all starts with awareness too. I really like this phrase. If you encounter a very powerful darkness, know that somewhere there is light. It
Hmm.
reminds me of the phrase that when one door closes, a window opens. You just have to be aware of that happening. So, our minds tend to focus or over focus on the negative aspects of our lives or the negative aspects of the world around us. We feel like everything's falling apart. There's destruction, war, and terror all around us. But if that's all we ever think about and that's all we ever see, then it affects the very world that we live within as well, because the way we think is the way that we perceive as well, and vice versa. So our perception is our reality at the end of the day. And I feel like this mind shift right here of darkness and light is a really powerful one in particular, because it can really help people realize that at the end of the day, nothing is ever 100% bad or
Mm,
100% good either. And so because of that, you can find light within any sort of horrible story, no matter how bad it really gets. There's almost always a potential for a good ending, a happy ending.
that's very true. There can always be a happy ending. And we are almost coming to the end of this show. And
So fast.
it's a happy ending. But before we end it, would like to know, how can people, because there are people who are hearing what you're doing and they want to connect and maybe follow up with your podcast. How can they connect with you?
So, if you want to connect with me personally, you can find me on most social media platforms
Mm,
at Wesley Jackson SH. And if you want to check out our podcast and what we're doing, that would be survivinghumanity.net.
okay, that's wonderful. So you can head to survivinghumanity.net and get to hear the podcast, connect with Wesley, and together we can achieve much. Together we can break free from negative thought patterns once we remind ourselves, because it's coming from reminding ourselves each and every day, thinking positive, talking positive, and then taking positive action, and therefore achieving some positive results. We want to thank you very, very, very much, Wesley, for coming to this show. It's been
Thank
such an
you.
honor. Yes. And before you go, we would like you to leave us with just a few words that we should always remember. Which are they coming from you?
Ooh, okay, cool. I get to end this. Here we
Yeah.
go. So, the essence of my story is resilience. It's about understanding that no matter how difficult things get, we always have the power to change our own narrative.
Good. Yes, we can change our narrative anytime, anyhow. Coming from Wesley, thank you very much, and that's it for today. Thank you very much. This has been Now Tell Us. I have been your host, Anthony Moirore, and together with our guest today, Wesley Jackson, we're saying break free from negative thought patterns today. Yes,
You
you
can
can.
do it.
Yes, you can.
Yes,
Just
you
do it.
can.
Yeah. Until next time, it's bye for now. Bye.